This specific interview was one that I actually liked quite a bit. I thought the candidate was fantastic. I'm just going to say that up front. This is a mid-career, call it L6, borderline L7 product manager who was targeting a job at Amazon. The leadership principle that we're targeting this week, invent and simplify. And the question that I asked, and I cut off a little bit because I was really wordy in how I did it in the video, so that's why it's kind of feel like I jump right in the middle of it, is how do you get innovation out of your team? Things to be on the lookout for in this video. Number one, did the core question get answered? Right? Sometimes when you ask a question as an interviewer, the candidate will just start talking and it's very quickly obvious that they've just kind of derailed and they're not answering the question. They don't ever really close the loop on the question that was answered. So look to see if this candidate does that straight away. Not at all. Just look for it because I see it again and again in interviews, and it's just one of those things I'm going to highlight as you might want to pay attention to. Number two, kind of related to the first, but are you actually answering the question? Did you answer the question? Because look, I joke all the time that as an interviewer, if I ask you a question, you just start talking, you get all the way through your answer. If I asked you again, what question did I ask you? Most people don't know. The dirty little secret is most interviewers, unless they've got it written down, might also have forgotten, right? Because at the end of the day, what we really care about is how do you work? Right? So what you deliver in content ultimately will help shape how I think about you. But if you just completely don't answer the question at all, that's kind of a problem. And finally, and this is an important one. This is really important. I get asked all the time, how far back in my resume can I go for whatever story? And that really depends. It depends. But, and this is important, you want to make sure that the totality of your conversation with the interviewers across multiple interviews, that you are delivering against the scope and scale expectations of the role that you're targeting. It's kind of the age-old adage, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. And that's really what you need to look out for here. This person's targeting an L6 product management job at Amazon is pretty senior. I had guys working for me that were managing $300-400 million businesses as L6 product managers. L7, that jump, it's a big jump. So it's a lot of scope, a lot of responsibility. And I don't think a lot of people really truly understand that when they're interviewing with Amazon and they just see, principal product manager. It's a step down. I'm a VP of product at whatever startup company. It's a lot of scope to be an L7 product manager at Amazon. And so you have to ask yourself, is what I'm conveying in the totality of the stories that I'm sharing, am I matching the scope and scale expectations for the role? As with all these videos, I will play it back in its entirety, the interview, and I will jump in from time to time with commentary. Welcome back to Interview Out, where our core mission is to help 10,000 people land their dream job. And let me tell you, whether it's through YouTube or through the content library or through any number of the ways that I'm touching lives, it's been a fantastic ride so far. The emails I get, the text messages, people getting jobs, it's fantastic. So if you've liked the content, if it's been in any way useful to you, please go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, click the share button, send it to a friend of yours who you know is interviewing as well. Anything helps the channel, helps me get discovered, and helps more people like yourself prepare better for their interviews. So I'd like you to just spend a little time talking me through how do you ensure that your team or teams, right, when you're managing managers, how they are continuing to stay innovative, but at the same time you can't possibly be on top of everything.
Sure. So I'm just processing the innovation side because
Sure.
Coming from construction, building materials, I'm going to have to, if it's okay, I'm going to have to kind of be a little flexible with innovation. Is that
Fair? Yeah,
okay.
Fair. I understand.
Okay. So
there's a couple things I want to point out here, and one is really important, which is you don't have to come from a FANG or MANG, whatever we're calling it now, FANG company, to interview at a FANG company, to land a job at a FANG company. This guy was coming from the construction industry, and from the totality of the interview, he's outstanding, this guy. Really, really good, very, very thorough, very thoughtful, etc. Now, are there gaps that you're going to need to fill to demonstrate that you can do the work in the context of the target role you're targeting? Sure. And if I recall, that the job that this person was targeting had more to do with kind of like build-outs that was kind of more in line with construction than anything else, so it was kind of a better, more obvious fit, but it was still a product manager role. That's number one. Number two, if you are coming from a different industry, be sure to define what innovative means. It's going to mean different things to different people, and depending on where you're coming from, what you think is like ho-hum, other people might think is magic, and what you think is magic, other people might think is ho-hum. And so in this instance, he talks about coming from the construction industry. Just It's okay to come from outside the industry. Be clear then, be more clear about the stories that you're sharing and help bring me, the interviewer, along, right? Because I want to hire you. I'm tired of doing interviews. I've done too many of these, right? I'm tired. I'm looking at candidates all day long. As any generic interviewer, I want you to be the person. So help bring me along, tell your story, and get me there to see your greatness with good structure and being clear about the terms that you're using, and not just assume that when you say a thing, I'll necessarily understand what you mean, especially if you're coming from outside the industry.
2019, we were also doing a Salesforce integration. So when I came into the company, the CRM, they were jumping around CRMs. We tried Copper. I think it was HubSpot when I first came in. And I did a lot of research on it. And, I don't want to say that I was a Salesforce fanboy or anything, but it had the pros and cons of Salesforce is you can do everything. And that's also the con with Salesforce. But either way, we chose. And I wanted to make sure that we were implementing systems within the Salesforce customization that would automatically report some of the things I think that you're asking. That's how the question to me that I was trying to solve was, how can I get them to adopt the CRM while also creating a positive feedback loop for them to stay on task and push customer journeys forward. But at the same time, I got automation reporting on what they were doing on that, right? So I guess that's the point of a CRM. Yep. But so what I did was we had a sales seminar. I had everybody come prepared with 3 success stories. Their 3 biggest success stories in the past, and it didn't even have to be success in a particular sale or dollar amount. It could be a success in getting a product specified. It could be a success with a particular customer relationship. And I whiteboarded it, and I got up and I had them just talk through, tell me that win story. And as they talked through it, I tried to pull out key activities in that story that led to an aha moment or a light bulb moment in that success. So what we did was we came up with a list of it was about 20 activities, and then I started to tally as people kept telling their stories. Things such as, I jumped on a plane the next day, or I spent 2 days in the field with their technician, or I did an engineer meeting with them. Okay, so it was things such as that. Yep. In our industry, those were some of the innovative things to kind of be out there teaching. Not a lot of companies did that. The engineer side of things, positioning ourselves as technical leaders. And so what I did was then I got their buy-in that these were the key activities that we needed to focus on, right? Based on your stories, these are the takeaways that I see as key activities. Now let's rank them. So what we did was we did a 1, 10, and 30 point ranking on these. And, things such as an email, a phone call, or, things like that. Obviously those are 1 point activities. And then I took those key ones and put point values 30. Part of our Salesforce integration that we did was when you input a company, you could choose what product line that they were going to go into. And then based on that product line, it would then populate a customer progression of tasks based on what we identified in that sales meeting. And obviously, going from tasks such as 1 to the 30 point, what I did with this, and this is, I got some pushback from the team a little bit on how analytical, I was taking this, but what I started to do was I was tracking and this is one of the things I referred to in my resume, where I was looking at like the first and second derivatives of effort, for instance. So the point that I made to them was, we all do effort every day, but we need to make sure that we're progressing highest value activities. Maybe, say that's an analogy of staying innovative with the customer. So what I would actually do is track not only how much effort they were doing, but how fast that rate of effort was changing. So they may have a week that's an office week that's very heavily email, phone call centric, and they're inputting this activity. Well, I'm going to see that the rate of change of that effort is maybe 0, but either way, we're not making any progress. So that I would say that's probably the biggest way that I try to standardize the Salesforce use to make sure that the guys had an exponential trajectory of effort based on the value points of our key activities. And it did play itself out where the people that had the highest sales did more of the joint engineer calls with the customers. They did more of the 2+ day field trainings with the customers. They did a lot more of those higher value activities. So I was able to graph that against their sales and use that as, information in sales meetings.
So the core question that was asked was, how do you ensure that you're getting new and innovative thinking out of your team? And I think this is now me kind of reaching back into the past and trying to suss out what was going through the candidate's mind. I think they latched on to the words innovative and new in the context of their environment. And he did a good job in explaining, like, this was new for us. This was innovative for us. And that's fine. But unfortunately, he doesn't actually land the plane on how he was driving the outcomes, right? What he actually did was he described a process by which he was holding people accountable based on their work rate and their outcomes, which is more of a kind of a micromanagement framework for how to kind of move people along. And here's the things that you should be doing, do more of this. But that's very prescriptive, right? About the work that his team should be doing versus here's how I hold my team accountable for having innovative, novel thinking. Now, I want to be clear. I think he slightly misunderstood the question and didn't quite land the plane with regard to the original question. And that within the context of how he described this and how he describes industry, like, this is very thoughtful, very thorough, etc. But it did not answer the core question of how do you ensure your team is driving innovation? How do you stay on top of them? How do you make sure that happens? Right? This was more of a framework for how to make sure that they're achieving goals against things that work that you can kind of demonstrate with data. All of that's good. I don't want that to get lost in this. We've all answered an interview question where you get to the end of it and you did not answer the question that you were asked, but it's still a good answer. But in this specific instance, not what he did. And so I'm calling it out so that you see it and understand how an answer can get off the rails a little bit and end up in a very different place than where I think the question was intended. Well, I know where the question was intended to go. So you said you got pushback. What did you think that it was about your leadership style, right, that led you to a better outcome than where the pushback would have probably taken it?
I would say my leadership style, I refer to it as a collaborative individual ownership. And I very deliberately try to, like that example with the sales seminar where I had them identify these activities from their stories. I always want it to be a collaborative process, but they take individual ownership because they were the ones that told me, right? This was from their story. This wasn't me just giving them top down, this is what you should be doing. So one of the ways that I try to kind of stay ahead of pushback from the team is in that collaborative process where we come up with it together, but once we agree on it, now we have to deliver. And if they don't deliver, then I can always go back to that collaborative process and say, these were your words. You gave me this feedback as far as what customers need and what those key activities are. So I think the pushback that I referred to there was probably more along the lines of the data input than the way I was analyzing it. Just a lot of guys in the construction industry in general are, I would say, I guess it's a broad stroke there, but they're a little bit less likely to sit down at the end of their day in their hotel room and input data, into
no, not unless by input data you mean drink at the bar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's probably where I got more of the pushback. And then I did get a little pushback on, they just, a couple of the guys that were underperforming just didn't like what the data said, right? I mean, when I had it graphically laid out now that, hey, you're not doing the high value efforts, and here's the chart that shows your weekly and monthly and quarterly efforts, and they didn't like the accountability perhaps. But again, in answer to your question, my management style, I like to make sure that in the beginning, when you set up a system or a reporting system, that it's collaborative.
Okay. So the final question was about the pushback, right? You said you got pushback. What do you think it was about your leadership style that led to this outcome, specifically the outcome being the pushback? And the candidate, again, this is one of those where I think he just latched onto the wrong word and misunderstood the point of the question. The point of the question was, what was it about this thing you just walked me through that would lead to pushback, right? And what, as a leader, when I'm listening to this candidate and listening to them describe their process, I'm thinking, well, this feels a lot like micromanagement, and that you're kind of being prescriptive about how you want people to work, and you're telling them what they have to do, and you're kind of pointing out, here's the high value stuff, and you're not doing the high value stuff, and I'm going to tell you what the high value stuff is, but then I'm going to convince you that this is the right way to go. And what he heard was, what's your leadership style? So then proceeded to walk me through how he's collaborative and wants basically his candidates to use their words to tell him what they're going to do so that they can agree, even though they're really parroting back to him what he said, so they can all agree on what the words are, and then he can then turn around when they're not doing it and say, hey, these were your words. This is what you said. Again, throughout the totality of the interview, this was a really good candidate. This was a problematic question for him because in two different points in the question, both at the outset and in the follow-up, he just kind of missed the point of the question and ended up answering the wrong question, which sometimes can be extremely informative in an interview. And it happens. It happens all the time. Totally fine. Not a worry. But when that happens, just be aware that it is entirely possible that me as the interviewer, I might interpret it as, well, either, well, this guy's not answering the question and that's not good, or I'm going to just keep pounding on the question until you eventually get it. And if you don't, sometimes that says more about your listening skills, more about your ability to actually answer the question or your experience, any number of things, right? So it kind of creates a bit of a trap for you as a candidate if you do the wrong thing. As with all my videos, what I like to do is read the assessment I would have read into the room if I had been on the hiring loop. But before I do that, when I work with candidates and when they get their report out, one of the things I like to do is include a series of go-dos. And one of the go-dos is one of the things I talked about at the front end of this video, which is making sure that your story maps to the scope and scale expectations of the role. Mapping out a list of, here's things you should do to be a more effective salesperson. It can come across as, quite frankly, a little bit small ball and obvious in the context of the leadership principle, invent and simplify. Now, we've already established this candidate kind of got off the rails a little bit and didn't actually answer the question that was asked. And that's, in some cases, it's totally fine. But in this specific case, it was, how are you driving innovation and make sure your team is innovative? And he then walked me through a process that he used to get them to do certain things. And even the example he used then was slightly small ball-ish and kind of obvious for the industry he's targeting. And that's where it gets a bit tricky, is that you might, again, I know I said at the front end, like, hey, what's innovative for you in one industry may seem, old hat in another, but I also said what seems like old hat for you might seem like magic to others. But this is why it's helpful to have mock interviews. Quite frankly, it's helpful to talk to people in those companies and say, hey, this is a story that I was planning on using. Does it wow you? Does it impress you? Does it sound like something that's innovative? Or whatever leadership principle you're targeting, it's helpful to have those conversations to understand where you're going to shake out, because this is one of those instances where the story itself, it just was like, it was okay. It wasn't up to snuff for the target role that he was after. So the assessment I would have read in the room for Invent and Simplify is, candidate demonstrated high degree of empathy-led leadership in bringing new processes to his company, but once again relied on the crutch of stating that the industry is not one known for innovation, and therefore it was hard to come up with a good answer. This is not an acceptable answer in an Amazon interview and would be perceived as learned helplessness. There's a phrase that haunts me to this day, because Jeff Bezos himself asked me if I was suffering from learned helplessness, which was a rough moment because I didn't know what it really meant at the time, and I had to have it fully explained to me what I had said, and that's a story for another time. But learned helplessness as a leader is a bad place to be, which is to kind of state in this case what happened is he's basically keeps saying again and again, well, I'm not that innovative. I'm in tech. I'm not in tech. I'm in this industry, and we don't do that. We don't do that. It's kind of, you're making excuses along the way for why you haven't done the thing that you could probably do. And this is a very talented and capable individual who could have, but using that as a crutch of like, well, it's the space I'm in and we don't do that. It's painting you, the individual, as not doing your best work, and you're kind of deflecting blame to the fact of where you are, right, in the universe of people that you're with versus where you could be based on the work that you could do. And that's critically important. You want to shine as bright as you can in an interview. And kind of self-deprecating remarks or kind of saying that, oh, I'm not smart enough to work here. Oh, we don't do things like Amazon, whatever it is. It's not helping you. It's not. And in this case, this was the second interview question out of 6, or I guess 5 that we covered for this candidate. In the first 2, there was just hints of, quite honestly, Amazon awe. And that happens a lot with candidates I see targeting Amazon, Facebook, Meta, Microsoft, Netflix, Google. I've seen it all. And these are people who, they just want the job so bad, and they just feel that imposter syndrome. Look, we all feel it. I'm going to be 48 next month. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. It's normal to feel imposter syndrome. It's totally normal. Keep striving, keep working, demonstrate, shine bright, and don't use those crutches of, well, I couldn't do it because. That's not going to get you the interview. That's not going to get you the positive assessment at the end of the interview.